Hello. Before I get started with this presentation, I would just like to say that I'm sorry that my face isn't being shown during this. I tried to figure out how to bounce between the camera showing my face and me being able to share my screen, and I don't know enough about technology to be able to do that. So, out of the two options, I picked showing my screen so I could show the bell graph with the test results. But other than that, let's get into this presentation. Hello, I'm Kayla Cosmo, and I'm one of the special education teachers here at school. Today I'll be talking about Sydney's test results from the assessments we gave her and what I think we should do moving forward based off of these test results. So, for a little background, Sydney was referred to us by her classroom general education teacher for not making progress in math and reading despite Tier 3 interventions. And what Tier 3 interventions are, they're intense interventions, or a better way to word it would be intense help that can either be individualized for one single student or with a very, very small group of other students. And this sort of help targets the struggles that the students are having with their academics. And so in Cindy's case, she was getting intense help with her math and reading skills that were below proficiency. And despite getting this extra help, she wasn't progressing like she should have been. Before the assessment, I met with Cindy for 30 minutes a few days prior, and she was very polite and cooperative with everything that was happening. And so this indicated that there were no behavioral issues that she was showing. The assessment that we gave to Cindy was the Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, and this was the third edition of the test. And so essentially what this assessment is it's just one of the many, many tests that can be given where we can see specific areas that need to be helped instead of an overall score in one general subject. Looking at her test results, we can see that her math composite is the lowest of her composite scores, and so that is shown down here. And the math composite is broken up into two sections, which are the math concepts and applications and math computation. And so her math composite skill being one of the lowest in the very low section of this bell graph, this correlates with what the general education teacher was telling us about her struggling in math and not progressing in it. Um, so up here, we can see that the average score for a student based off this bell graph would be in the 100 area. And so Cindy is two standard deviations or more than two standard deviations below in her math composite section. And what the standard deviation means is that each standard deviation is in 15-point increments. And so her being more than two standard deviations below means that she's more than 30 points below where she should be. So she's below the 70 mark. And that puts her into the low and very low areas, and her math score is in very low. In none of Cindy's scores went into the average area. All of them were below average. And we can see that with one of her highest scores, which is in the written language area. So her written expression is above that 70 mark, but it's still one standard deviation below where the norm is for most students her age. Because a standard deviation below is that 85 mark, and she didn't quite make it there. The areas that we are concerned about are the ones, though, that are two standard deviations below. And so those are the areas that are below the 70 mark. And so we've got her academic skills battery composite. And so this encompasses a lot of different areas. We've got her math concepts and applications that we talked about earlier in her math composite section, and that's in the very low mark. And we also see her letter and word recognition is in the same boat where it's below the 70 mark, and it's actually in the very low area, just like the math. Her written expression is like what I said earlier, which is just one standard deviation below. Her math computation is in the very low section. her spelling is low and below that 70 mark, and her reading comprehension is above the 70 mark, but still below average for where the normative is. And so, based off of these scores that we're seeing right here, we can see that Sydney is experiencing some dyslexic tendencies. And so, this doesn't necessarily mean that she has a form of dyslexia. However, her experiencing dyslexic tendencies can lead to us doing further testing. However, even with further testing and a diagnosis for dyslexia, we're still going to be um, there still will not be a difference for the services that we provide because we're working on getting these individual sections up regardless of a diagnosis that she may receive. And so, based off of these scores and them correlating with what her general education teacher said, and them being in multiple scores being in this very low area that's below the 70 mark and indicating her being 2 standard deviations below this 100 average or the normative of students her age. This indicates that she is multiple grade levels below where she should be as a 6th grader. And based off of this information, I would recommend special education services to her. And this doesn't necessarily mean pulling her from class and giving her one-on-one interventions. However, that is something that could be done if needed. But to start off with, this can be just her experiencing some one-on-one help while she's still in her general education class, or her working with a special education instructor with those subjects like math and reading that she's struggling with. Some other suggestions that branch outside of the special education services realm would be journaling could help her. Journaling could help her reading and writing skills progress because despite her written expression being high, like I said before, it's still below the average, and so that's something that can be worked on. And if you look right in the academic skills battery composite, you can see that her spelling is in the low area and it's below that 70 mark. And so her journaling can help her improve on her spelling since she'll be practicing her writing and seeing how the words are actually being written out. And she can learn the corrections with those words while journaling. Um, Another suggestion that I would have for Cindy would be repetitive oral readings. And this may help with some of her dyslexic tendencies that she is showing. And so, one score that I mentioned that I was very concerned about earlier was her letter and word recognition. And that's because it is right at that 40 mark. It's in the very low section at the end of the bell graph. And it's more than 2 standard deviations below what the norm is. And so since this is one of her lowest scores, we really need to try to focus on getting that up. And so repetitive oral readings would be a good way for her letter and word recognition to rise, since it helps students with repetitive readings, you get to see the words and letters multiple times, and so that helps you have some retention with recognizing them, and then having multiple repetitive oral readings with a variety of different books or text can help her begin to recognize more words and letters. Um, in the end, though, like I said before, I would recommend special education services to Cindy, whatever they may be, and this is something that will have to be talked about um, later on with the other specialist here. But in the end, some form of one-on-one help regarding with a special education teacher would help Cindy improve her scores. So, yeah. That's the end of my presentation. I'm sorry it went downhill a little bit. I was very nervous and my mind was moving faster than my mouth, so I was having a hard time explaining some of the things that I was trying to get at, like the oral reading thing I was having a hard time explaining. But thank you so much, and I really enjoyed being in your class. Have a good break and stay happy and healthy.